Welcome to the Journal podcast from the Chartered Insurance Institute, a place for thought-provoking discussion from the world of insurance. I'm Tim Groves, Professional Communities and Engagement Manager at the Chartered Insurance Institute. Today, we're diving into one of the insurance profession's growing challenges, subsidence. We'll be discussing what it is, why it's becoming more of a concern, and how environmental changes like drought and extreme weather are shaping the risk further. Plus, we'll look at the impact of climate change on claims and premiums, what homeowners can do to protect themselves, and how the profession is evolving to meet these challenges over the next decade. Joining me today is William Quibell, Head of Claims at Ageas UK, and Caroline Elliott-Grey, Senior Product Manager at Lexis Nexis Risk Solutions. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you all here on this really important topic that is obviously very relevant right now. I thought it would be really good because we have quite a variance of listeners and sometimes some of them are quite new to a profession. So I thought it'd be really, really good to start with a question as to what exactly subsidence is and what does it mean for the insurance sector. So Will, shall I come to you first?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. In simple terms, subsidence is the downward movement beneath a property. So if we take a domestic house in the UK, it's the movement of the ground beneath the foundations of that house, which will then typically play out with cracks appearing in the property, which is normally what a homeowner will see. So in effect, just downward movement beneath the property. Subsidence is an insured peril under a standard UK home insurance policy, and has been since post 76, for those that are old enough to remember the warm summer of 76. So for the best part of 40 to 50 years, UK insurers have been insuring for subsidence. Why is it significant? We have had a trend in more surges, which is related to the warmer climate and the warmer weather that we've had in recent years. And when an insurer or the insurance industry experiences a subsidence surge, as they have through the summer of 25, then that means more claims for insurers and more pressure on the market and more disruption for customers.
And if I don't remember 1976, but I've heard lots about it because it was the year I was born, and my mum tells me that it was not a good year to be heavily pregnant with the temperatures as they were. So I know a bit about it. So let's ask a question then about what have traditionally been the main causes of subsidence and how has that changed in the last few years? Caroline, you'd like to take that one?
So one of the leading drivers is that clay shrink swell cycle. So clay soils are highly susceptible to the shrink swell cycle due to moisture changes. So hotter, drier summers cause the clay to contract, which leads to ground movement. And then you combine that with wetter winters, and then we see that cycle continue. Over the last decades, the increase in drought frequency, which is linked to climate change, has intensified that shrink swell cycle, especially in the areas which are prone to the clay-rich soils. Another driver can be tree roots. They also have a significant impact on subsidence as well. So large trees which are near buildings absorb a significant amount of moisture from those clay soils, which cause localized drying and shrinkage. But then the removal of those also has a negative impact because you then get that increased moisture near foundation. So it's just being really mindful of the tree roots around a property. The over-extraction of groundwater for either agricultural use or urban use lowers the water tables, which have an impact on soil compaction. Another driver that we're seeing is an increase in urban development. So especially introducing basements or any underground layers, that sees an increase in excavation-induced subsidence, which has increased over the last 10 years. So there's some of the main drivers that we're seeing there.
William, anything from yourself on that point? How you've seen it change in your career as a claims manager?
I think the industry likes to talk about change, but essentially subsidence is not indifferent now to what it was like when I entered the industry in 1997. So I'm a former subsidence engineer myself, and the first surge that I dealt with was 2003. And that was a really, really warm, hot, dry summer. It was the first significant subsidence surge since the last major one in 1995. And in reality, they look and feel very similar. So the last surge that we had was in 2022, and then we had another one in 2018, and they look and feel the same. I think the overarching challenge for homeowners and insurers is third-party trees. So it's unlikely that a property would suffer from clay shrinkage without the influence of a tree. And normally there'll be three types of owner, which will be the homeowner owns the tree and it's relatively straightforward to persuade them that that tree needs to be removed to protect the property. Then a neighbour can be complex, but often won't be. But then a local authority, so a council. There are less tree officers in local authorities than there were 20 years ago. So it has become more challenging to engage local authorities to remove trees. And also trees are good for the environment. They look nice. We all like trees. There's a really strong argument to not remove a tree. And often a local authority, I wouldn't say put up opposition, but they will require a high level of proof from an insurer before they contemplate removing the tree. And so all those things kind of wrapped together mean that a subsidence claim involving a local authority tree can be really, really quite stressful and challenging for a customer, but then also very, very costly for insurers.
And I suppose there's a lot of red tape when it comes to local authorities as well. So probably a lot longer process, I guess, as well.
Yes and no. I think if I was a tree officer at a local authority and the insurer was asking me to remove a tree, I would be inclined to say no, because trees are good for the environment. And so how insurers work with local authorities to overcome they're quite conflicting approaches to what needs to happen to a tree are vital. But as I say, there seems to be less tree officers. And I think Caroline referenced the more susceptible areas. So if you were roughly to take a map of the UK and draw a line from, say, Hull to Exeter, everything to the right or to the south or to the east of that is where you get your more highly shrinkable clay, particularly in London and the home counties is where you get the really highly shrinkable clay and also the most expensive housing stock. So it's almost a bit of a double whammy. So engaging local authorities in the London area is key for insurers. But yes, it can be challenging. And I think local authorities would say that insurers are challenging as well. So those claims are very, very complex for customers and insurers.
Well, that wasn't one of my questions, actually. Are some areas more susceptible to subsidence, but you've obviously just explained. And I do remember, I worked in personal lines for many years, home and car insurance. And I remember when the questions started becoming a lot more important, asking people if they've got a tree within a certain distance of their property. I remember not having to ask that and then it becoming more and more, and obviously now probably even more so. So obviously we're going to touch on sort of climate change today and the impact that that's having. So how do you think environmental changes such as extreme weather and drought, how are they influencing the risk of subsidence? Caroline?
So I think it's like what I said, it's always been there. It's just becoming more frequent. So there is a significant impact because we're seeing more of those hotter dry summers, we're seeing more of the wetter winters, and it just repeats itself. It just goes on this cycle, which then obviously has that impact on the clay soils and then on subsidence claims. The ABI stats tell us that the warmer, sunnier springs on record and more volatile seasons do correlate with the amount of claims that we get. So as we see those hot, dry summers, we are seeing the more claims come in. And so based on that, we can see that the climate is changing the impacts on the payouts as well. So yes, it's just this cycle. As the climate keeps changing, we will see that further increase on subsidence.
Well, do you think those surges are becoming more regular as opposed to it's not the actual subsidence claims themselves haven't changed, it's the surges are becoming more regular?
I think the facts speak for themselves, Tim, to be honest. So major surges were 95, 2003, sort of 2006. And then it wasn't another, they always get an uptick in August to kind of October, November. But from 2006, there wasn't another surge until 2018, as in what we would deem a proper surge. So you've gone over a decade and then 2018, 2022 and 2025. I think some experts I've read and heard some experts saying, when you get this regularity of surges, there'll be less claims in the system. So for example, claims that were picked up in 2018 wouldn't be in 2022 and 2025, but the temperatures are becoming hotter and warmer. So there are properties that have never suffered subsidence before that have suffered subsidence in 2022 and 2025. But then back to what I said about local authorities, you then get added risk because if we look at 2022, there will be claims that were submitted and are still open in 2022. Think about the local authority tree cases where when the summer came along or we had the warm weather in the spring and the summer of 2025, those claims were still open. The trees hadn't been removed in many cases. And so those customers are seeing an exacerbation of the damage that they already had. So it is quite complicated in terms of for insurers to manage the risks that they take on with subsidence. But we are seeing exceptionally dry and hot summers, the likes of which we weren't, most of us on this podcast wouldn't have seen them when we were children. It was only in 2022 that we had, in our industry, we had fires in London. We had effectively what in America, Australia, we call forest fires. We had fires that spread to urban parts of London because we regularly had temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So we are seeing hotter, drier weather. And I guess the climate appears to be changing. And therefore we can expect to see more surges than we've seen in the past.
I think in addition to that is, as well as the surges continuing, it's where, so like William said, right now, the impact is quite concentrated. But LexisNexis Risk Solutions completed some analysis on the British Geological Survey data, which shows that by 2050, we expect another 1.2 million homes in the UK to be at risk of subsidence. So it's not just the areas that are prone today, it's going to be the additional areas that will be impacted as well.
Are there particular types of properties that are more susceptible than others? Is it older properties that are built a certain way, or actually are new properties better built for the risk of subsidence?
That's a really good question. So again, it depends. We're talking about clay shrinkage. So effectively moisture being extracted from clay. If you're not on clay, you won't have an issue with tree-related subsidence, but then you can get subsidence-related consolidation. I'll say fill materials if you have a leak in drain. In the main, those claims won't be as severe. So we're only talking about clay shrinkage here. There are now regulatory standards in terms of the depth at which a foundation must be built. NHBC standards, for example, will require a certain type of property built on a certain type of subsoil to have a certain depth of foundation. So technically there is more protection for homeowners, but some properties, older properties that are built on more shallow foundations on shrinkable clay soil are more susceptible. But where often insurers will see issues is lightweight structures. So porches, garages, conservatories, outbuildings will often be built on a really shallow foundation or just a raft, and they're more susceptible. So we do see lots of claims for, say, conservatories and garages and porches. I guess theoretically, modern properties should technically have a higher bar, a higher standard of protection because of the requirement to build foundations to a certain depth. But then we also have this dynamic of warmer, hotter, drier summers. And also what actually you need for a surge is you need a dry winter and then a hot summer, which is what we've seen in 2018, 2022 and 2025. So although house building standards are protecting customers, you've also got this added dynamic and dimension of warmer summers mean more moisture extraction. So I'm simplifying something that's highly technical, but those two areas are kind of competing against each other, as it were.
Yeah, no, we love simplification. Thanks, Will. That's great. So thinking again, there might be some brokers listening to this podcast. There might be some people who are new to the profession and want to really understand this. But how do insurers assess the risk of subsidence before underwriting a home policy?
So LexisNexis, we've seen a shift from postcode to property level for understanding the impact on a property. So risk is scored based on the topography information of the soil type, and then also information such as tree coverage, the proximity of trees to a property, the property age and construction, whether there's a basement present. So it's all those bits of information that we're starting to see insurers ask LexisNexis Risk Solutions for to include in their risk assessment of that property. There's a couple of different ways they can get the information from LexisNexis. So we have APIs, so LexisNexis Inform Quotes, and we also have a mapping tool, so which is the LexisNexis Map View, and that understands them to get that granular level view of what is the impact, not just from subsidence and the trees that we talked about, but what is the impact on their accumulations and their exposure overall. So there's a few different ways that we're seeing them start to take different information from LexisNexis.
Great. Thanks, Caroline. Anything to add, Will?
Yeah, I guess look at it slightly differently from the insurer side. So generally we'll use the experience which is declared by the proposer, by the customer when they submit their application for home buildings cover. We do use our internal claims experience a bit more broadly, but as Caroline said, in the main, we'll use data that's externally available to us as well to rate the risk or the severity of risk. It's not just related to subsidence, because subsidence is an action that can happen in itself, but the subsidence peril also covers heave and landslip. So areas of data that we as insurers look at to assess our risk include subsidence, mining data, coastal erosion data, soil dissolution data, sinkhole insight, and data on landslip susceptibility. It's in a different place than when I started 28 years ago because of the availability of data. And then also AI at some point may start to play a part in that as well at a later point. But yeah, way more complex than I remember. When I started in the industry, I think the question was, are there any trees within striking distance of your property? And have you ever suffered subsidence, or has your property suffered subsidence? So it's moved on a fair bit from there in the last 20 or 30 years.
So one of the biggest challenges then for insurance companies when investigating subsidence claims these days?
I would say availability and capability of personnel. Personally, I quite an interesting journey. I was a loss adjuster at RSA back in the very, very early part of my career. Then there was this really warm summer in 2003, and I was seconded over to the Subsidence team as a very young, early mid-20s loss adjuster stroke surveyor. And I had the good fortune to have lots of, for want of a better phrase, middle-aged, experienced engineers and surveyors to be able to call on their expertise to help me. They've all left the industry and they've not been replaced. So a common theme that you and I have spoken about on other topical podcasts, Tim, is availability and capability of the talent pipeline. This is a serious problem for the subsidence market in the UK. So we just don't have the range of subsidence expertise in the field. So what insurers need when there is a subsidence claim is they need a surveyor or an engineer to go out and assess that subsidence, determine proximate cause, and then take that claim to conclusion for the customers in the best and quickest way possible. And that talent pool of expertise is so significantly diminished from what it was even 10, 15 years ago. So that is the biggest challenge. More recent challenges are post-COVID, Brexit, and the last 5 years, claims inflation has been running at double digits, but that crosses all other perils as well. But subsidence is a complex peril, and getting it right for customers is important, because when a customer has a subsidence claim, it's a bit of a sentence for them because they can't sell their property until the subsidence claim is concluded and they have a certificate of structural adequacy. And with less capability in the field, then those decisions at times may take longer than they used to. So I would say that's the main challenge for the market at the moment.
Yeah. Anything to add there, Caroline?
I think most of it's been covered. I think, they are complex. Subsidence, it's a slow developing risk. And that then makes them difficult to, I guess, when they hit, that obviously the resolution of them as well. So I think we'll cover most of it on that.
Excellent. Again, that's thinking about if we've got any brokers or young underwriters on the call that deal with clients. Can you give any advice on how homeowners or businesses, what they can do to minimize subsidence risks in the face of environmental change and the higher risk?
There's a really simple thing that homeowners can do, really, really simple. You can go online and you can determine very quickly online the type of soil or subsoil that your property sits on. I could do it with my property right now within 10 or 15 minutes. If your property is built upon clay, then the second action you need to take is look at trees. And the general rule of thumb with a tree, some trees are really problematic for subsidence, oak trees, willow trees, for example. But if you can determine, which you can online, whether you're on clay, and if the answer to that question is yes, have a look at the trees and use the simple rule of thumb. What's the distance from the tree to the property? And is that exceeded in the height? So if the height of a tree is greater than the distance between the tree and the property, then it's likely to be a problem if you're on clay subsoil, if the conditions are right. So, for example, if there's a willow tree and it's 15 meters high, but it's only 5 meters from your property and you're on clay subsoil, that is going to be problematic in the right conditions. But if the willow tree is 10 meters high, but 30 meters from your property, you don't really need to worry. Now, there are nuances to that, but that is the single biggest thing that any homeowner or property owner can do. Obviously, if you don't own the tree, it's slightly more problematic, but understanding what clay you're on and the distance of a tree to your property is absolutely key. So if anybody listening has, say, a very large coniferous tree that isn't deciduous, like most people do in their gardens, and they've got a garage or a conservatory and it's really close and you're on clay, you're probably best off looking at that and considering whether you want to take it out, as a really simple example.
Is it a reasonable rule of thumb? This could be shockingly, terribly misinformed on me, but the size of the roots generally match the size of the tree itself above the ground?
I think that depends on the species, but it's the tree roots that will extract the moisture, which is what causes the subsidence. And again, if you use the simple rule of thumb, if the height of the tree is greater than the distance to the property and you're on clay, it could be a problem. And then you can make a proactive decision about whether you want to remove or ask for that tree to be removed, which would protect your property.
There's loads of great advice, some from the ABI. Probably simpler things to do is making sure that you maintain your gutters and your drains and your plumbing. That just prevents soil softening or any washout around your property. One thing to think about is avoiding extensive impermeable paving, just that you make sure that you do maintain soil moisture balance, need a footing to the property. And then it is watching out for those telltale signs. So if you suddenly see some diagonal cracks that are greater than 3 millimeters, any of your windows and doors start sticking, then seek that assistance early. So the earlier that you can seek that assistance, the better it's going to be in terms of trying to minimize the damage.
Okay. Well, that's great advice. Thank you. So just something else that I'm thinking about now is, Will, you said about how claims costs have been on the rise anyway. So subsidence claims, if we're seeing more often, then obviously there's going to be a bigger payout to the industry as a whole. How does that impact a customer who's living in a home where they've had subsidence? Is it challenging them to then get insurance, or what would happen in that situation?
It can be challenging, but shouldn't be. So when an insurer is concluding a subsidence claim, normally involving some kind of significant repair, the customer should be provided with a certificate of structural adequacy, which is really important because that then enables the homeowner, if they want to sell the property, to be able to demonstrate and prove to a would-be buyer that the property is now structurally sound. Generally, the market practice is for an insurer that has had a subsidence claim to continue insuring that risk. And that's the general practice within the market. But then it could be the case that a customer has been asked by an insurer to take measures and steps, a bit like a security endorsement on a policy. If you live in a certain area, lock your windows and your doors. If you go out, that they've been asked to maintain a tree a certain height or take specific action which would reduce the risk, which is the most important thing that a customer can do. But generally, insurers will continue to manage a risk once they've had an engaged and valid subsidence claim registered and lodged and paid and closed under their policy.
Gosh, I can imagine that can be stressful enough trying to sell and buy a house, isn't it? You have to deal with that as well. Okay, so one of my final questions really, what do you both see the insurance profession needs to do? How does it need to evolve in response to climate change and other environmental changes over the next 5 to 10 years? Caroline, go to you first.
Yeah, so from a Lexis Nexis data perspective, there will be much more focus on that property level pricing and a widespread adoption of geospatial data, which we've said before needs to include basements, so the whole range. So it's not just whether it's at risk of subsidence, but it's everything else that's in that proximity. So the tree information, basement information. That also gives insurers the opportunity, they've got this information, to nudge their customers at quote or renewal about taking these things into consideration. To support with these, there will be real-time mapping of subsidence exposure alongside flood and wind, just to steer capacity and reinsurance. And then data sharing will be crucial. So market contributed claims histories to reveal prior subsidence at address level, and that can then sharpen the triage. So it gives more of an understanding, not necessarily just that the property's had it, but an indication of anything in that area, and just to share that information that's available.
Great. Thanks, Caroline. Anything to add, Will?
I think just like I said previously, Tim, the lack of capability to manage subsidence claims across the market is something that I personally think, without wanting or wishing to sound dramatic, is a bit of a ticking time bomb. There just aren't that many subsidence expertise in this market at the moment. And that's challenging for insurers and for customers. I think a few decades ago, some insurers had their own in-house field teams. And at the kind of early 2000s, across the market was to disband internal field forces and outsource it to external third parties. And I think probably the output of that is being felt now. So insurers need to look and model forward, because these climate changes, to simplify it, the fact that we have hotter, drier, more uncomfortable summers obviously we are a nation completely obsessed with the weather, but when we do have these drier summers, and that's just the new norm now, we are just going to have very, very hot, dry summers in the UK because we've had 2 in the last 3 years, which is clearly not coincidental. Insurers will just get more subsidence claims. Any kind of theoretical argument that there will be less subsidence claims because there's been claims in the last 2 or 3 surges, to me, it doesn't stack up. So, for example, claim volumes have been lower now than they were in 2022. But a clear driver of that is the housing market has been really benign, and often people won't see cracks until they try and sell their property and someone comes to look and they see that crack. So that's something we've experienced through 2025. So I think we're just going to continue getting more weather, and we're going to continue getting lots of subsidence claims when we do. So insurers leading the change that is needed to train, attract talent, and have the right capability is absolutely critical. But I was asked this question over 10 years ago and gave the same answer. And so the situation is exacerbated now. So that's what I think needs to happen. But whether it will or not, I'm not sure.
It almost needs that someone to really highlight this is an issue, whether it means a report or something that needs to go out to the profession. And I guess that's people retiring, but then not being replaced at the other end. Okay. Well, is there anything either of you want to add? If anyone's renewing the profession, maybe brokers, any sort of tips or advice about dealing with a customer and what they should be thinking about when it comes to subsidence? Or do you think we've covered everything?
I think Caroline covered it pretty well actually earlier. If you see a crack in your property, the likelihood is it isn't related to subsidence. In the main, it's just going to be something like thermal movement or kind of natural shrinkage or differential movement between different materials in your property. But as Caroline said, if you've got a couple of telltale signs, so you've got stepped cracks in your brickwork and the crack is reflected internally and externally and it's tapered so it's wider at the top than it is at the bottom, or differential movements, if you can see a conservatory or an extension with a long tapered vertical crack and it's moving away from the main property, just contact the insurance company straight away. If they're not sure, they're almost certain to send somebody out to have a look at it who will be able to confirm whether it's covered or not. And unlike probably any other peril, a repudiation or declaratory subsidence claim can often be a good thing because it means you don't have subsidence. But if you're concerned, my advice is just contact your insurer. They'll investigate and tell you whether you have it or not. And if you do have it, they will sort it out for you.
And I guess there are any brokers out there, they've got lots of questions about data, Lexis, Nexis Risk Solutions. We have a lot of data around anything perils related. So please get in touch and we can help support you, answer any of the questions that you've got.
That's really good to know. Thank you very much. I think we've covered lots there and, hopefully we've delved in a little bit deeper on some areas, but we've also kept it quite simple for any younger listeners that might be joining the career. So thank you both so much. It's been really, really interesting. And I'm sure this is going to be a conversation that's going to be discussed a lot more as time goes on. So we may be in another podcast in a year's time exploring what's changed, if at all. So thank you both so much. It's been really, really interesting and really useful. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Caroline. And yeah, we'll speak again sometime, no doubt.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you so much once again for listening to this episode of the Journal podcast. You can find useful links in the show notes and related articles on the Journal website, along with further podcasts. Please, as always, like, review, and subscribe to follow this podcast. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.